and you realize, all too soon, that you're not good enough. That maybe there was a jerk-off called Darwin after all. And that you never acknowledged his existence because you knew deep inside that you were really what you feared you were. Weak and passive and ultimately broken by the ones who were made the fittest.
You guys know how when a good show ends, it leaves a sort of void where the show used to be? Like, when you know you'll never get to anticipate a new episode coming out again, and you kinda just have to go on living in a world where things are just slightly different. It's happened to me a couple times with some shows that have really impacted my life, like Hey Arnold, Gravity Falls, and most recently BoJack Horseman. The only real thing you can hope when a show ends like that is that it ends well with all of its plot lines resolved and a nice feeling of closure. Unfortunately, when a show gets canceled, the creators sometimes don't really get a chance to wrap things up as tightly as they would like to. The reason I'm mentioning this is I want to talk about how Moral Orel ends today, as the show's creators knew the show was coming to a premature end, even as season 3 was getting started. Does it end with a bang like I would hope for, or does it end in kind of a whimper? Well, we're gonna find out today. And I would just like to give everyone a very special thank you for following me on my journey through the Moral Orel videos. It really means a lot and has made these videos some of my favorite videos I have ever created. I hope to see you guys moving forward in the future as I review other shows that you might not know about. Well, with all that mushy stuff said, let's end this thing in the Moral Orel Season 3 Retrospective. So as you guys know, when Season 2 came out, the show was quite different than the previous season. Does Season 3 manage to evoke that same feeling of uniqueness? Well, the short answer is yes. The long answer is, holy shit, what happened to the show? Well, a big part of it is the fact that the creators had to wrap up a lot of its plot threads a lot earlier than anticipated. In fact, this season mainly focuses on the other characters due to the fact that the creators know this is the last season. The season was originally supposed to have Orel have a lot more of a dominant focus, and the planned season 5, that's right, not season 4, was supposed to be about the townfolk. It is kinda sad knowing we'll never get to see what could have been. This season tells its stories in an interesting manner. Most of it predominantly takes place before the hunting trip in the season 2 finale. Only a couple episodes actually take place after it. The intro to the season takes place on the day of the hunting trip, but instead of seeing the trip again, we get to see what Blauberta does while Clay and Orel are gone, and boy, oh boy, is it not a pretty sight. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna go ahead in this video and leave a couple warnings in certain places in the video, just so you guys who are a bit squeamish don't end up seeing something you don't want to see, because there's a lot of dark elements this season. So, like I said, there's going to be a couple timestamps in the description, and I'll have a warning sign before each of these situations. With that said, here's your warning if you don't want to see any discussions about topics of depression or self-mutilation. Alright, is everybody gone? Is everybody gone who doesn't want to see this stuff? Okay, I guess. In this episode, we explore Blauberta's complicated feelings of wanting to be loved and just how bad her relationship with Clay has gotten. She's fallen into a state of depression so bad the only thing that makes her feel alive is self-mutilation.
That's some injury, Mrs. Puppington.
We see throughout the episode it gets more and more dangerous as she just tries to find something to make her feel. Originally, it's only due to her depression, but eventually when she goes to the doctor, who seems morbidly intrigued by her injuries, she ends up falling for him because she mistakes his fetish for mutilation as affection for her. This actually ends up ramping up Blauberta's efforts, causing her to mutilate herself even worse. This all comes to an end when Blauberta confesses to the doctor, but he coldly rejects her advances. The episode's ending suddenly shifts focus to Clay as he drunkenly stumbles upstairs and overhears Orel's talk with his mother about why she married Clay, something we don't really get to see in the season 2 point of view from Orel.
Marry Dad.
Oh, well. Why not?
Well, it's just that when he drinks, he changes.
Oh, he doesn't change, Orel. That's just his true nature coming out.
Now then, I don't normally talk about music in my videos because I usually feel I'm not the most qualified person for that type of thing, but I don't think I could have gotten a more perfect band than the Mountain Goats to do the intro and outro to this episode. It just fits Clay and Blauberta's relationship so well. The good thing about me not being able to monetize my videos yet is I can just say bring on the copyright strikes and check out the ending.
I hope that our few remaining friends give up on trying to save us. I hope we come up with a fail-safe plot to piss off the dumb few that forgave us. I hope the fences we mended fall down beneath their own weight, and I hope we hang on past the last exit. I hope it's already too late, and I hope the junkyard a few blocks from here someday burns down, and I hope the rising black smoke carries me far away, and I never come back to this town again. In my life, I hope I lie and tell everyone you were a good wife, and I hope you die. I hope we both die.
So if you guys have some time and you want to check out a new band, I definitely recommend checking out the Mountain Goats. They do some really good music, and I think they deserve some more recognition. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, already the first episode sets the tone for the season. Other episodes this season include what Orel did to get punished for his punishment in the beginning of Nature. And I have to say, it's such a trippy episode. It involves Orel getting grounded from church after Clay finds him bathing in his friend's blood due to some misunderstandings, which we find out about in the next episode. But Orel doesn't actually end up getting a normal grounding. He actually gets grounded from church, which causes Orel to slowly lose his mind. It's really hard not to feel sorry for Orel. In fact, in one of his bouts of insanity, he comes to the conclusion he is a church. So he starts wearing a miniature church figurine that Clay finds out about earlier in the episode and ends up throwing away. After he's done wearing it, he comes to another conclusion that he needs to apologize to God for not going to church anymore. This eventually leads into Orel trying to kill himself to talk to God, which somehow actually ends up working. We see in one of his I'm just gonna call it a delusion, even though that's not a really accurate term for it. He actually ends up having visions about things we've seen in the series, but some of the visions he has are things that they haven't experienced yet, since this episode takes place before the hunting trip.
See into the future.
When he wakes up, he recounts what happened in his near-death experience. Unfortunately, it really doesn't align with the views of Moralton, so Clay ends up beating the revelation out of him. It's really dark, actually, because you see him, he's met his idol, he's really happy, and he's trying to share that happiness with everyone, and they don't want to hear it. And you know what? The beating worked. He doesn't remember any of the things he learned from it. Oh. Anyways, next episode is about Orel, and he goes through a bunch of misunderstandings when people don't want to give him advice anymore due to misunderstanding, which ultimately leads him to believe the only way for him to be innocent is if he bathes in his friend's blood. You'd have to watch the episode to understand, really. Before I talk about episode 4 of the season, I need to give you guys another warning. This is without a doubt the darkest episode in the series, and I understand completely if you want to skip this portion of the review, but this episode has such a strong impact that I feel like I would do it a disservice if I just glossed over it. So if you're uncomfortable with scenes of abuse, sexual violence, trauma, rape, abortion, feelings of inadequacy, and depression, then please skip to this timestamp. Alone, the 4th episode of this season is the first to not feature Orel in any way, and honestly, it's such a brilliant decision on the creator's part. Orel's chipper and naive attitude would have brought this episode down in quality. Alone is about 3 of the women in Morrilton: Nurse Bindi, Miss Sculptham, and Miss Cincerdoll. As the episode progresses, it switches back and forth between the women, but to keep the review coherent, I'll just tell their entire stories in their own segments. Nurse Bindi has been introduced in other episodes as being used as, honestly, the town's bicycle. Nearly everyone has slept with her, and in other episodes, that's all we find out about her, other than the fact she seems a bit slow. But not this episode. This episode, we get to see what happens when she goes home. When she arrives at her house, we see her get changed into a housewife's outfit, and we see her imaginary family with 2 stuffed bears taking the place of her husband and son. She feels a close connection to them because they are the only ones who haven't viewed her sexually. She really just wants to be treated as a person, but she doesn't know how to say no. Due to a mishap at dinner, Hubby Bear ends up falling on her in a very proactive position, and this causes her to spill milk on them both. And I don't even have to comment what the scene looks like. Nurse Bindi ends up freaking out because her only safe space has just been compromised, and she's lost all the trust and security she felt in her home. This part of the episode actually just ends with Nurse Bindi crying, and there's no resolution for her story here. On the other hand, we have Miss Cincerdoll, the town's protester who wants to ban anything and everything she finds immoral. This is probably the lightest part of the episode, and even her part is still pretty pitch black. We find out in this part that maybe there's more to her character than we originally thought, when it's actually teased that she might have had something to do with the accident on the hunting trip. We also find out that due to the fact that her mother had her reproductive organs removed when she was an infant, that Miss Cincerdoll has a god complex and believes she needs to roll over the town. Well, this is the final part of the episode. I wanted to talk about it before the 3rd story because the 3rd one is definitely the darkest. The story in this episode involves Miss Sculptham as she arrives home, and you can immediately notice a form of distress from her. She comes home, locks the door, and when the radio talks about abortion, she immediately turns it off. We see her undress herself as she looks at her family tree. This lets us subtly know that family is going to have a part in her story. When she turns back on the radio, it turns out we hear Mr. Creeper, the pedophile from the Doey episode last season, was actually killed in prison after being sent there for raping women. After that, we find out from newspaper articles that Miss Sculptham left her door unlocked and allowed him to rape her because she was in love with him. Afterwards, she feels guilty about it due to the fact that she gets off on the memories of him violating her. He also impregnated her, which caused her to give herself an abortion in order to prevent the pregnancy, but it's very heavily implied that there are twins, and the abortion only actually ended up killing one of them. Ultimately, this is the episode that got the series cancelled, and I can kinda see why. It's a very dark experience to sit through, but ultimately I think it's done with enough tact to quite possibly be one of the best episodes in the series. It's hard to imagine how much darker things would have become if their series continued after the season. Honestly, I think if you feel like you can handle the episode, then you should watch it, because it tells at least 2 really good stories about 2 characters you would never imagine to care about. Well, we did it. We got past the darkest episode this season, so going farther, I don't think we need any more warnings, probably, hopefully, maybe. Anyways, this next episode is still pretty dark, but it's not as dark as some of the other episodes. It involves Doey and Orel, as Doey slowly takes over Orel's life and becomes more a part of Orel's family because he knows how to shoot a gun, while Orel is still learning for the hunting trip. It makes sense in context. The episode actually ends with neither boy happy because even though Orel can now shoot, he feels empty inside, and Clay reveals to Doughy he was just using him to get Orel better at shooting. Episode 6, honestly, is the only episode I really feel like isn't that important to the plot. We find out Joe is Nurse Bendy's son, and the episode ends with them bonding. I'm glad for Bendy after Alone, but this episode doesn't really intrigue me too much because it's more so about Joe than Bendy, and I'm not a big fan of Joe's character. Episode 7, however, is another very important one. Episode 7 flashes back to when Clay and Blauberta first get married, and it features another Mountain Goat song, this one also perfectly fitting the theme.
Stand on, from the aspirins to the crosstops to the Ellavilles, but I will walk down to the end with you.
We find out that Clay used to not drink at all, and it was actually Blauberta that ended up getting him to start drinking. After she ends up getting him drinking though, he ends up getting drunk and starts making moves with other women. This causes Blauberta to get very angry, so she ends up punching Clay, knocking him out. When he wakes up, he's in her lap and he doesn't remember anything from the previous evening. She tells him he passed out and she helped him. She then tells Clay she wants to keep helping him, and Clay agrees, so they end up getting married. While they're getting married, however, you can see they're getting married. I'm saying getting married a lot. You can see they're both at the altar with their vices in hand, Clay's alcohol and Blauberta's cleaning products, showing this is probably the point in time where they're really getting broken. Ultimately, this episode shows that Blauberta is not just a victim in the entire marriage. She helped Clay on his start of darkness. And then episode 8 comes out. This episode involves another flashback, even farther this time. This goes back to Clay's childhood, where we find out more about him than we've ever seen before. First of all, we find out Clay's mother was incredibly doting on Clay, to the point where it was kinda suffocating, and this caused Clay to become a spoiled brat. His father didn't want him to be taught like that, but Clay's mother wouldn't relent with her teachings. We find out after an argument between Clay and his mother that Clay actually has some brothers and sisters that never made it into the world due to his mother smoking while she was pregnant with them. However, this time, whenever Clay was actually born, it caused her to become incredibly possessive and doting on him, which led to Clay becoming how he is now. It's really unfortunate, actually. Doll exploits Clay's Oedipus complex. Clay pretends to shoot himself in his study with the family gun that we see back in season 2, Nature. This causes his mother to have a heart attack. His father, so enraged with what his son did, ends up starting to beat Clay over the slightest thing. This backfires, however, when Clay starts to associate his beatings with being loved. After his father says you're not worth it anymore, when he decides he shouldn't beat him anymore, because Clay's looking forward to it, this causes Clay to kinda mentally break, and it actually gives us a new look on Orel's punishments from Clay, as if it's kinda Clay's way of showing his love. It's a pretty dark episode, but a very important episode as well. Episode 9 actually has us see the return of Christina, Orel's female counterpart. Orel ends up asking her to a dance, and she says yes. We also get to see some more of Reverend Putty being a dad, which I like. A+, I will always enjoy that. It's also a really nice touch. And it shows that his character growth wasn't just for that one episode. He comforts Stephanie over a girl Stephanie used to like. The girl actually ends up being Doughy's mom, so you can kinda already see that she's not a great person. Episode 10 actually starts all the way back at the start of the series. It involves mostly Reverend Putty as he gives his Sunday sermons, leading all the way to the latest point in the timeline, where he sees how down the town is. So he looks to Orel, who is usually the epitome of hope, but when even Orel is depressed, this leads Putty to change his sermon's name from Hope to Hopeless. Episode 11 takes us back in time again to right after the hunting trip, where Clay leaves the house and goes to the bar. There he meets Putty, Officer Papermouth, and Dr. Potterswill. They're all depressed about their own circumstances, which are shown back in the last episode. However, Clay proceeds to attack all of them verbally, and honestly, Clay's voice actor in this episode just does such a fantastic job with his speech, conveying the emotions that you would imagine from this broken man, that even if you know Clay is ultimately in the wrong, you can't help but feel sorry for the guy. Anyways, it looks like the town is about to beat Clay up. However, just like Clay's father, they decide he's not worth it, hurting his ego even more. Episode 12 finally shows us what Clay's dead-end job is. He's actually the mayor of Morrilton, which helps to explain some of the fucked up stuff that happens there. It also includes Miss Cincerdoll getting Orel to help her run for mayor. She uses the fact that Clay shot Orel to help boost her chances of winning. This episode also shows that Orel is no longer scared of his father's beatings, which also hurts his father emotionally again. At the debate between Cincerdoll and Clay, we see Cincerdoll realize Clay has an Oedipus complex, so she withdraws from the election. Clay tries to find out what she's up to from Orel, but Orel genuinely doesn't know. After Clay finds out about that, he says,
I'm glad I shot you.
Cincerdoll exploits Clay's Oedipus complex, causing Clay to cheat on both Stopframe and Blauberta with her, in a very squeaky scene. I know I said I wasn't going to probably have any more warnings this video, but I feel like I should probably have a warning there. After that episode, we get to the final episode of the season and the series finale. And it's a pretty good episode, but unfortunately it's not as good as the last season finale. You can definitely see how it had to be rushed to finish the series. The episode begins exactly 1 year after the season finale of season 1. It shows a little flash forward of all the events that happened in the series so far, well, all the important ones anyways. Orel tries to talk to Clay, but Clay ignores him and says someone should remember the 10th commandment, honor thy father. However, Clay has the mother part of it crossed out. So Orel tries to find out what about his father he should honor, and he really can't find anything honorable about Clay. He searches around, but nobody has an answer for him. Eventually, he comes across Coach Stopframe, who has his own share of problems this episode. After catching Clay kissing Cincerdoll in the previous episode, Stopframe is disgusted with him. He can't see anybody's face but Clay's now, as he's heartbroken, until Orel ends up seeing him. He realizes that he sees Orel as himself and not his father. This ultimately causes the two to actually bond, in some sweet scenes, which is nice to see with how dark the season has been. Clay seeing Orel hanging out with Stopframe causes Clay to get jealous of Orel though, so he goes to meet Stopframe at his house where Orel's there drinking some hot chocolate, and he says he misses Orel, which isn't true. He's actually talking about Stopframe himself. Blauberta seeing Clay break down at Stopframe's house causes her to tell the kids that they should leave. And they do. And at the end of the episode, we see Orel walk through his house depressed. But we do end up getting to see a time skip of Orel gradually growing up. And the series ends with him as an adult, married to Christina with 2 kids of his own. And he's happy, which is really nice to see after the fucked up events of the series. And to send us out, we get one final sermon from Reverend Putty closing out the series.
Today's Christmas sermon is about family. What is family? Well, a lot of times, family is just a bunch of people who are forced to be together just because they came out of each other. But every so often, a miracle happens. A loving family. Just like that, out of nowhere. Now, what causes this? A belief in God? A strong moral structure? Blind luck? Who knows? Who cares? You're not going to get any answers out of me. I'm just a puppet for the big guy. I don't write this stuff. The end. Amen. Nah, who am I kidding? The end.
In the credits, we actually get to see Orel's finally done with his claymation. So he gives his set to his brothers Blocky and Shapey as a Christmas gift. And there we have it. That's the final season of Moral Orel. Luckily it didn't get cancelled in the middle of the season, that way the creators could at least make a decent stopping point. Still, it makes me kinda sad knowing there is so much more to Orel's story that we don't get to see. But, you know what? That's okay. We don't have to know everything. Sometimes the questions are better than the answers. And an important thing that the show has taught me is that even though sometimes too much faith in something can lead to corruption and darkness, faith is ultimately what saved Orel. So Reverend Putty put it best, have a little hope, at least for me, will ya? Once again, I'd like to thank you all for your support on this series. It really made me have a wonderful time looking back on this show, and makes me really look forward to the future of this channel, and my future with all of you guys. So, I like to leave this for the end of the video, but if you like this retrospective, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and possibly subscribe if you want to see some more content from me. This has been Stuffy, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.